Well, hi everyone. Florence Wetzel joins Inside Scoop Live today to talk about her new book, Sara My Sara. It's an intimate and moving exploration of friendship, unexpected loss, and the gifts revealed in grief's aftermath. And it's such a pleasure to share this experience with you. But before we get started, here is the inside scoop on the author. Florence Wetzel was born in 1962 in Brooklyn, New York. Her latest book, Sara My Sara, a memoir of friendship and loss, was released in July 2024. Florence's novels include The Woman Who Went Overboard, a thriller, and The Grand Man, a Swedish mystery. She has also authored a horror short story collection, a book of poems and memoirs, and co-authored jazz clarinetist Perry Robinson's autobiography. You can learn more about Florence Wetzel and her work on Linktree at linktr.ee/Florence Wetzel. Well, hi, Florence. Welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Hi, Sherry. Thank you so much for having me.
To kick things off, why don't you tell us about your book? What is Sara My Sara about, and what was your inspiration for writing it?
So, 2013, my father died, and my mom was left, a widow at age 87 after 56 years of marriage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and my mom's housekeeper at that time was a Brazilian woman who helped her out a lot with my dad. And then after my dad died, my mom decided to keep her on a number of days a week. Unfortunately, her mother became ill in Brazil, so my mother needed to get a new housekeeper. Housekeeper kind of slash companion. So one of my mother's three masseuses, because yes, my mother had three masseuses, recommended Sara. And my mother already knew Sara because she went to the masseuse's house once a week, and she often saw Sara there, and they got along. So Sara started coming to our house. So I moved from Denver back to my childhood home in New Jersey. So it was my mother and I living there, and then Sara coming about 3 times a week. And my mother and Sara, it was really beautiful to watch. They really developed this very loving friendship, and they both had this similar sense of humor. And I was very happy to see that, and I got along with Sara well. But it wasn't until my mother started, becoming very fragile herself that Sara and I really became a team to take care of my mom, which my mom didn't like because she didn't think she needed anyone to take care of her. She was very sassy. So as my mom got weaker and weaker, Sara and I got closer and closer, and she helped me up until the very end with my mom, and then she helped me to clean out the house, and we got very close to the process. And Sara was the same age as me. I'm 61 now. She was in her 56 or 57. And to my great shock, she was diagnosed, it was January 2019, she was diagnosed with a glioblastoma, which is aggressive brain cancer. And so the next 17 months she was in treatment, and, her whole world turned upside down. Her family's world turned upside down, her many friends. And she did the best she could. She did everything she was told to do, and then some. But ultimately she died after 17 months. And I've always written. And the way I deal with things in my life is to write about them. But when that was going on, I just couldn't even think about writing about it. And then after about a year, the idea came up to write about Sara. It started out really thinking about, a tribute to her and her courage during this long 17-month battle. But then the book, it was interesting. It became, to my surprise, I couldn't talk about Sara without talking about my mother. So the first part really has to do with my mother. The second part has to do with Sara and her illness and her eventual death. And then the last part is about me and my grief and finding a way to go forward without these two women. So that's a long answer, but that's where the book came from. The desire to tell Sara's story and what she went through, and then also, I guess, to tell my story too about my grief and to work through my grief actually through the writing of the book.
Yeah, wow. What a beautiful story. Powerful, very powerful and personal. It all seems like it had such a profound impact on you. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure. And it did. Yeah. Everything was very heightened during that time.
Yeah.
everything is just more kind of vivid and urgent during times like that. So you really get very close with people.
Absolutely. Wow. What was your approach to writing about such, personal and emotional experiences? Was it difficult or did the words kind of flow? Was it cathartic?
That is a good question. It's very interesting because it was actually when everything was going on, even like with my mother and her decline, but especially with Sarah and her illness, which, as I said, went on for 17 months. I found it very hard to talk about. Words are so wonderful, but sometimes if you try to describe something that has so much emotional impact in your own grief and somebody else's, it's hard to talk about. It's hard to even find the words.
Hmm.
I think that was in the back of my mind when I was thinking about the book because I thought, I don't think I want to write this as like, traditional prose. And what happened that inspired me to write the book in what I refer to as lyric prose, which is some people call it prose poetry, but to me it's really lyric prose. It's basically prose that's broken up into short sentences. It looks like a feed on your phone. It's
Mm.
like a long column. And I read a book. I was very interested in Swedish literature intensely for a long time. And there was a book that won a very big award in Sweden in, I think it was 2017. And it's been translated into English. It's called Osebol. I'm going to spell that for people. It's Osebol. And that's the name of a very small town in Sweden.
Mm.
So the book is actually written in that form. And it's interviews with people. It's a really fascinating book. It's interviews with people from this little town that they lost their industry and, the people that are still hanging on there. But she writes it like that. It's like this long column and these very short sentences. And I loved reading it and I found it very captivating. And so when I started thinking about writing Sarah's book, that form felt right to me because it's like, I found when I talked about Sarah, it was almost like every word was very chosen in some way. Like it wasn't so easy to talk about. So that was
Mm.
my impulse for writing in that book. It was sort of like a reflection of that to hopefully make the words more impactful. But the other thing with that was also that to literally leave space because it is a very heavy topic for a book. There is humor in the book. There definitely is because both my mother and Sarah had quite a sense of humor and I think I inherited that from my mom, but it's a very heavy topic. And so I just felt I literally wanted there to be space for just the emotions of the book and just the words and what I was trying to say. And when I started writing that way, it did just come as a natural flow. It felt very natural. And I felt really from the first day I started writing, I was like, yes, I'm going to do it in this form. It's not the traditional form, but it's how this book wants to be told.
Isn't that funny how something just comes to us and you just know it's right? Can you give us an example of the writing?
While I look for something, I can tell you it's a little bit funny. There have been several people that have contacted me and they've said, I just want to let you know, I think that there might have been a problem with the printing in your book because it's just, the lines are really short. And I was like, no, no, that's how it's supposed to be. I think that in Sweden, because that book Osebo won that big award, I think it's much more common and there are more people that have that style. I actually read a novel written in this style, which
Oh,
you can
wow.
hardly believe that that could be. Yeah, and at first, someone just recommended this novel to me, and I started reading it. I thought, oh my God, this is written in lyric prose as well. Okay, this is just a little section.
Yeah.
Slowly, Sarah and I emptied the house. We gave away hundreds of books, dozens of furniture items, hundreds of porcelain pieces, and 80 pairs of black trousers. As the contents of my mother's house gradually vanished, Sarah and I became happier and lighter. But at the same time, we also became sadder and heavier. As the house disappeared, so did my mother. More space was created for the fathomless void she had left behind. The house wasn't pregnant with my mother's absence. It was screaming.
Oh, wow.
So I think just looking at this, I don't think there's a line, like one line, some lines have like 5 words to them or 6, but that's, yeah. So it reads like, prose.
Mm-hmm.
It just is styled differently. But people actually told me once they got over their sort of shock, they actually found it very easy to read and that it went quickly. And as I said, I really think, we're used to reading on our phones this way. I think it's going to become more and more common that people write books this way too.
Yeah, I like it because I could visualize how the words were written just by you reading it. And the stops all make sense to me, perfect sense. So nicely done.
Thank you. It really was just kismet in terms of knowing I wanted to write this book and then just reading that book. Also, I was in Sweden too at that time, and I actually went to see the author twice. I read a lot of interviews with her because I was just so fascinated by her. And she wrote another book as well that hasn't been translated in this style. So I really give her a lot of credit. Her name's Merit Kapla. So she really inspired me.
Nice, nice. You mentioned balancing the weight of grief with moments of levity or humor in your writing. How did you go about that?
It's really funny because I think it happened without me even trying. So there were scenes that, clearly were poignant. One example would be, my mother had very bad macular degeneration, and it got to the point where really she shouldn't have been driving, but she was very stubborn and she didn't want to stop driving. So there's a chapter about me actually having to hide her car keys, and I went away and Sarah was looking after my mother, and my mother like went through the house like a hurricane, just like looking for the keys. And then finally her doctor said, you can't drive anymore. And then after that, every time my mother, if we meet someone new, she'd say, this is Florence. She's my youngest daughter. She's the one who took away my car keys. So something like that. Like, even though it's a very, very, it's sad. Here's my
Yeah.
mother. She's older. She's declining, but just her natural spirit, it's woven together. And, there are plenty of moments of like that also with Sarah, because she also had quite a sense of humor. And another thing that I think, not moments of levity, but just, this was just the way life was then. For the 17 months that Sarah was ill, I wasn't in New Jersey all the time. I was traveling.
Mm.
So there are these three rather intense sections when I'm in New Jersey and I'm seeing Sarah regularly and I'm part of her team of caretakers. But then like I'm away and I write about that. Just it is very intense being with someone who has, very serious illness like this. It's intense. It's a lot to take. I think it'd be a lot to ask a reader, to read a 400 book about brain cancer that's only about that. I think that you need time to like take it in. And that also just happened naturally because of the way my life was set up then.
Yeah, yeah. And I wasn't laughing at the situation. I love the way your mom kind of laughed when she said that because it was kind of like she was almost putting everyone else at ease.
I know. My mom was funny. She really was, like I said, sassy. As I say in the book, like it's hard taking care of someone who doesn't want to be taken care of. But, but I give her a lot of credit for that. She didn't want to give up her youth and her independence. And yeah, so
Yeah.
that was my mom.
Oh. How has your perspective on grief changed since writing this book?
I have great respect for grief. I have a great respect for grief as a shapeshifter. There's no blueprint for grief. I think that there are things that we can do to help ourselves. There's a lot of great, actually, how-to books on grief. Some of them are, from psychologists or therapists or things like that. But in my experience, grief is very tricky. Sometimes it's like a quiet whisper, and sometimes it's like something that's poking you, and sometimes it's something that's screaming at you, and sometimes it seems like it's gone away, and then suddenly it comes back. There is no blueprint. Somebody told me recently about someone they knew who their son had died, and they were posting on Instagram about the funeral. And I thought, well, that's how that person dealt with their grief. They just needed it to be like seen. So I think I have a great respect for it and a great respect for all of us as we try to navigate this.
Yeah. Not everyone can read a clinical manual about grief, but they can connect with someone like you who has been through a similar experience in caring for the people that they love. So for me, it's a deeper connection.
Oh, thanks for saying that. I think that might be true. It's sort of like, yeah, it's deeper, and I don't know if the word softer came up to me, but just more personal. And I have started getting reviews, and I have had people, I know somebody who recently lost their brother, and a writer, and, she told me it really helped her. And that's the thing. And that's, if there's, I don't know, a message in the book, or one of the messages is like, we can't take away other people's pains. We can't take away what's happening to other people, but we can walk beside them.
Right.
And this one review recently really touched me, and I felt like, well, maybe that's what Sarah and I are both doing, hopefully, is like, walking beside people as they go through this. And there's a lot to be said for not feeling alone, or that you're not the only person in the world who feels this, or does strange things, or like gets really angry. Anger can be part of grief too. And I had that. And it's not always very flattering what I write about myself, but I just wanted to be honest. I think it gives people permission just to be who they are and feel what they feel. Hopefully, that's my hope. I wrote this book for Sarah. I wrote it for me, but wouldn't it be wonderful if it did exactly that, if it was not a manual, but just sort of, someone walking beside you when you're going through this. That would make me really happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're already experiencing some of that. I would call that a success. How do you think the age differences and life experiences impacted the formation of your deep connections with Sarah and your mother?
It's interesting because Sarah had lost her mother. When she met my mom, she had lost her mother, and my sister Diane had died. And so my mom had lost a daughter. So, I mean, there definitely is a part where they just liked each other. Do you know what I mean? They just liked each other. They had a very similar sense of humor, and it just clicked. It just worked. But I think there might have been, they both had like a need for that, for someone in that role. And they filled that for each other, but it happened in this very, natural, organic way.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of age, the funny thing with me and Sarah is we have almost the exact same birthday. We're both born in 1962, and I was born in October 14th, and she was born on October 17th.
Oh, wow.
So in that way, in terms of age, it just felt like she was like my twin in some ways. So it was like, oh, okay. So like we knew exactly, we're in exactly the same place. So that was very interesting. And with my mom and me, I experienced something which I imagine other people caretaking an elderly parent experience, where the roles get reversed. Your mother is still older than you, but like, for instance, my mom developed very bad arthritis in her hands, and she often couldn't button her own sweater or zip up her own jacket. And so I remember one time we went to Starbucks every morning. Starbucks is part of the book. And I remember like getting on my knees to like zip up her jacket, and suddenly realizing like she did that for me like, 50 years ago. So sometimes there's an age difference, but the roles get reversed. So that's also part of the book, because that was really the hardest thing for my mom to accept. She didn't want that. She wanted, of course, because she wanted to be the mother, and she didn't want me in that role for my sake or for her sake. So we did our best with it.
I think that's just a mother's natural instinct. It's like, well, I'm the mother. I'm supposed to take care of you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh. Were there any parts of the story that were particularly difficult to share?
Yes, I think the most difficult parts were, my mom's last weeks and also Sarah's last weeks. And one of the things I realized with this book is like, to tell the story, people didn't need every single detail. Do you know what I mean? Like, you want to help people preserve their dignity. And at the same time, you're telling the story, and part of that is like, them being sick or losing the capacity to do certain things. And to try to do that, not in a dramatic way and not in a way that makes them lose their dignity, but just, kind of straightforward. And that's where the lyric prose was very helpful, because if you have that like tight format, then you're not going to go into this excessive description of something, because it's really not made for that. I think that helped me with that. But that was really hard. It was also hard because it was painful. And I have to tell you that just about every draft I worked on this book, I cried. The first draft a lot, but I cried. And I think another thing that was hard to write about is, like I said, the things that were not particularly flattering for myself, like things that I did, like times when I was angry or I was immature. And again, it was sort of like, I don't need to write about every instance, but I felt like, no, that's part of it. I felt very lost, and I didn't know what to do with all my grief, and that's part of my story. So it's important to be honest, but to keep things in a balance.
Yeah. Was it harder to write in that way, or once you set your mind to writing this lyrical prose, did your thoughts kind of flow that way as well, or did you kind of have to think about what you were going to say? Do you know what I'm asking?
I do know exactly what you're asking. No, it just came out that way, which is really interesting. But I definitely did a lot of editing. Like going through thinking, oh, well, I don't need that paragraph, or sometimes entire chapters. I say chapters, they're very small chapters in the book. You know what it's like? I always think like when you're revising a book, it's like redecorating an apartment. Like first you see the big things like, oh, I need a new sofa, so you get a new sofa and then you're like, oh, I need to change, the wallpaper. And so sometimes it took me a while, but I would think, that scene is much too long, or you don't need two examples of something, just
Mm,
do one. So I think part of keeping things sort of like tight and compact had to do with the lyric prose form, but some of it had to do with just me going through the book as writers do again and again and again, and just like fine tuning, polishing the prose. I took a writing course once where they said, for the text's sake, and the classic thing, kills your darlings. Like something might have been
right.
a really funny anecdote about my mom, but it didn't really add anything to the story, or it sort of slowed down the narrative pace. And then you have to be ruthless. You have to kill it. You just take it out. And for the most part, I would see, oh, really, it's better now without it.
Yeah.
So that's how I worked with that.
Okay. Yeah, it's just being willing to make those cuts and kill your darlings,
Yep.
as you said. uh,
Exactly.
did you have any kind of rituals or everyday activities that played into your grieving process?
Well, before I started writing this book, I would generally write every day. And I say writing, it might not be first draft, but I'll be editing something. And when my mom was ill, I mean, even I remember sitting in the hospital with her and like going early and like working. Like I'd work for like an hour. She'd be sleeping in the morning. And I held on to my writing as like this stability in my life. Like no matter what, I kept doing that. And I really don't think I missed many days. Not because I'm this disciplined, virtuous person, but because I was just hanging on to that. And I think writing also represented kind of a hope for the future. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm
Mm.
doing this with the aim that I'll put it out. So during my mom's illness and last days, I was working on a thriller. And then after that, I actually worked on horror short stories. And I just worked on them all the time. I think holding on to the things you love, even when you're in grief and even when someone that you love is very ill and maybe, having an extremely hard time, to keep doing the things that nurture us so that we can help nurture them. And for me, that's what writing was like. And so when it became time when I wanted to start Sarah's book, I already was doing that every morning. I've been doing that, that I devote time every day for the writing. And with Sarah's book, I have to say I wrote very slowly and I wrote very little, but I just kept at it because it was so emotionally loaded for me to write about that. But that was how I handled my grief, the grief coming out in the writing. I just didn't try to do too much and it ended up working. So sooner or later I had a first draft and then I could go from there.
Yeah, I feel like if you force those things, then it takes away a little bit of the authenticity. But writing it shortly after you were experiencing all of that, like I said earlier, I'm sure it was cathartic and then also assisted with your healing process, but it couldn't be rushed. It was something that, and you can't rush the grief process. The same thing. You've got to go through all the steps, and sometimes you have to go back and do all the steps over again. And there's just no cookie cutter way to do that.
Exactly. And that's exactly as it is. I was especially with the first draft, I was very gentle with myself. I was actually in Dublin for that summer and I didn't really know anybody there. So that was actually good. So I really just, I took walks, I read detective novels, I went to the movies. I really just sort of like lived in a very gentle way. I did not ask a lot of myself other than what I was doing every morning and writing that because that took so much out of me.
Hmm.
So I know it's not that people can arrange that in their life, but I think that is helpful if you're writing about something as emotionally loaded as this, that worked for me in any case.
Yeah, you got to be careful with your expectations too.
Hmm.
Were there any unexpected insights or realizations you had during the writing of your book?
I think one of them might have been the humor, the lighter moments that they were there. Because I think I didn't expect that, but they just kind of came up on their own because they were part of the story. So I think that was one of them. And also, Sarah has two daughters, Victoria and Her name is also Sarah. I
Oh,
call her Little Sarah in the book, but Victoria was getting married. And so that's actually where the book ends, where I'm just about to go to the wedding. And I thought that the book would actually end at the wedding, but it actually ends before I even go. Like the morning of when I'm about to take the train, I was in Santiago de Compostela, which is this beautiful holy town in Spain. It's an amazing place.
mm.
And I was just walking around in the morning and I suddenly had starting out all these ideas and I took out my notebook. I was like writing and then I'd walk like a little bit and then I was writing more. So that was a big surprise. I thought, as I said, the book was going to end at the wedding, but it actually ended there because I actually did come to some insights that morning, walking around. That was interesting. You can have your ideas about your book and how it's going to begin and how it's going to end, but that's not always what happens. So you just pivot. So that's what I did.
Right, right. You've got a plan. You might have an outline or something, but your mind and your
Hmm.
pen or your keyboard sometimes just dictates where you're going, not you.
Exactly, exactly. And I knew on that walk, like I was thinking, I was like, wait a second, I think this is the end of your book. So then I was just writing everything down. So
Huh.
that, yeah. So
Interesting. How has writing this memoir affected your relationships with other friends and family members that knew Sarah and your mother?
that is also a very good question. I actually got an email today from Megan, and she was a very good friend of my mother and me and Sarah as well.
Hmm.
And she just was saying she was, crying as she was reading the book. She also talked a lot about her relationship with my mother in this email. So it's helping her to remember things that aren't necessarily even in the book. So there's definitely people that are reading the book that are in the book. I mention a lot of people. Everyone I mention is real. Nobody has a pseudonym. A lot of people I mention just in passing, but some people maybe like they have kind of a chapter around them. And so when the book was like getting towards the end, I gave all those people those pages about themselves. And I just said, if you could just read it, if you see anything that's wrong or if I remember wrong, just kind of to get their blessing. And I think it brought me closer to all of them because they saw what I was doing and they saw that they were part of the story. So I think that was really nice. And I've tried to also give the copies of the book to my friends that are in the book.
That is nice. You were giving them the gift of being part of the process as well.
So I think that's nice. Like I did need them and I really wanted them to the blessing, but also like, yeah, they are part of the book. They're in the book and we're a big help, just helping me to feel like, okay, I got that part right. And there was actually one thing someone said, no, it actually said this. I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I asked you.
Hmm.
So, and then of course there's friends who aren't in the book, but that read the book and offered their opinions. And that's also very helpful. It takes a village.
Yeah.
And especially with a book like this, that's from real life with real people.
Right. If you could have a conversation with Sarah or your mother right now, or both, what would you want to tell them about the impact that they've had on your life and this book?
Oh, I think with my mom, I think there's some things in the book my mom she might not like that I told everybody about her Botox, but things like that. But she had a good sense of humor. The thing that's also gratifying to me is the people who read the book and they say, "Oh, I feel like I know your mother or Sarah." So I feel like they're sort of making new friends, even, at this stage. And, with Sarah, just that, her suffering was not for nothing, hopefully that is the thought that the book could kind of be like kind of an alchemy, that changing her suffering into something that could help other people. And I think that is happening. And I think that would make her really happy.
Yeah.
Um,
So, I guess in that vein, what do you hope readers will take away from your exploration of grief and friendship and finding one's place in the world after loss?
I feel that what I really want to say is encapsulated by a story in the book. My friend Elise, we went out, I was about to go see Sarah for the first time. I was leaving from Sweden to New Jersey, and I told her, I'm nervous about seeing my friend. She's sick. I haven't seen her sick yet. And she told me that she had cared for two friends who had breast cancer and ended up dying. And she said to me, it'll be hard, but watch out for the gifts.
Mm.
And I thought, what? I don't think there's going to be many gifts. She's like, nope, there's going to be gifts. Keep your eye out for them. And sure enough, even in the darkest moment, there are moments of humor and there are moments of grace and there are moments of insight. It's a mixture. And those are the moments that help you get through. And just that you can bear the unbearable. You don't think you can, but you can.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'd like people to take away, like to have hope.
Yeah.
To have hope that they can get through it, and hope that even if you have somebody who has a diagnosis like this, that you can help them and that you can strengthen your relationship during that time.
Yeah. I have great admiration for you writing such a deep, difficult topic that really seems to be making an impact on the readers that have read it so far. Just wow.
Oh, thank you so much. But you know what? I feel like I appreciate that. But my mother and Sarah were amazing people, so they were easy to write about. Seriously, it was, that's what I like. It's okay, I wrote the book, but it's them. They really were in their own way, really lovely women. So they made it easy.
Yeah. So what's next for you? Are you working on anything currently? You mentioned you write both fiction and nonfiction, as I understand. What are your plans going forward?
I've self-published a number of novels as far back as like 2003. And I am slowly going to be putting those novels out again. I am going through them. I'm editing them. I'm getting new covers made. And that is a process that's going to take a while. There's a couple books that relatively simple. I mean, I definitely have cut things out and tightened things up.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'm working on one now and I'm like, ooh, I need to do like a major rewrite. So that is going to be occupying my time for the next 2 or 3 years. So that's what I'm working on. And you know what? I'm not tired after writing the Sara book, but it's actually kind of nice just to be almost in that step back mode of like editing as opposed to like deep in my emotions. I think I need that. So that's what I'm working on. So the next thing I'm going to republish, it's going to be January 2025. It is a cozy mystery called Dashiki, and it's about the world of jazz. So that's what's coming up next. I'm excited about that. And that's a fun book. It's like much lighter and it's a lot of fun. And it's been so much fun going back to it and revisiting the characters and trying to improve the book, which I think I am because I hopefully know more about writing now than when I wrote that, 20 years ago. So that's what I'm working on. So that'll keep me busy for the next few years.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love that. Yeah, and it's probably interesting to see how much you've grown and changed as a writer too in doing that. And now you're giving a whole new generation access to your books. I love that too. Nice. Why don't you tell our listeners the best way to connect with you, your website, or where they can pick up Sara My Sara and any of your other work?
Sure. So I don't actually have a website, but I'm on Instagram at Florence Wetzel 108. And I'm on Facebook as Florence Wetzel. And I am on Amazon. So you can get the book as a paperback through Amazon. You can get it as an ebook through Amazon. And if you are a subscriber to Kindle Unlimited, I'm enrolled in that. So the book is free to anyone enrolled in Kindle Unlimited. And I have an email list. So it's florencewetzel.com/list. That's another way. And then whenever I have a new release, I'll send out an email.
Okay, great. Well, Florence, is there anything else you wanted to add today?
I just want to thank you, and I really want to thank Reader Views because I've really enjoyed being part of your services and partnering with you. And I just really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you so much for sharing such a powerful and personal story with us. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I hope we have an opportunity to talk again soon.
I enjoyed it too, Sherry. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me today for my interview with Florence Wetzel, author of Sara My Sara. You can learn more about Florence Wetzel and her work on Linktree at linktr.ee/Florence Wetzel. And be sure to check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.